to get going. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Courageous Love live version of our vodcast, turned into a podcast later, Jeff, just so you know. So in a couple of weeks, this will go onto the podcast. But I love for people to be able to see it live, to feel that raw emotion and to be a part of the conversation. Sometimes we'll see comments pop up and things. So Jeff Tunn, my friends, I'm so excited to have this guy on our podcast. He's the first guy that has been on so far. So we're excited to have you. Jeff, thank you for being here.
Oh, Amber, thank you so much for asking me to do this. I really appreciate it. I'm excited about our conversation tonight. A little nervous, emotionally about our conversation, but excited just the same.
You know, I get that. I've done this for a long time, and every single day that I go, like it's the record live day, I get a little bit of butterflies and I get a little bit nervous about how it's going to go, but it's always ordained. God always gives us the words that we need to have to make a difference in the world. And so it'll be good.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. So let me give a short shout out to Jeff Tunn. Been friends for several years now. You are an author, a speaker, and this is my favorite one, an explorer. You have had an incredible career in IT. You are the founder of the CIO Network. You are a member of Forbes Technology Council. And you are an author of Amplify Your Value and Amplify Your Job Search. Jeff, thank you for being here.
Again, my pleasure, Amber.
Yes. And as much as I could rave about you on and on and on, because there are lots of titles and things that we could talk about, tonight we're actually talking about your mom, Mary Ellen Tunn.
That's right.
Yep. And tonight's conversation is about your beautiful mother and her ability to find courage and confidence after a tragic accident.
Yes.
42 years after the fire, you published a second edition of The Flames Shall Not Consume You.
That's right. Yeah, it's out on ebook right now. We're in the process of working on the audiobook. That'll come out probably in a couple months.
I can't wait to listen to it. I'm going to read it and in the process of reading it, and I'm going to listen to it too, because the story that you've given me around just reading the audio version of it and being in there as the voiceover is happening has been incredible too. So without further delay, let's dive in. What happened on January 4th, 1980?
Oh, wow. So my mom was nearly killed in a fire. She was working as a bookkeeper in a church in downtown Indianapolis near East Side. And was there over lunch by herself, and a fire broke out while she was in the building by herself. Long story short, the only way that she could get out of the building was through the second floor window. And so she hung on that window for quite a while before she dropped down to the ground. Broke her back when she landed on there was an air conditioning unit underneath of her, and she landed on that and then fell to the pavement. Broke her back doing that, and a passerby had seen her dangling from the window and came to help her. The story, the book is her story, not only of her journey through the fire, but her journey through the aftermath of the fire, and honestly, her anger and argument with God over this tragedy that happened in her life. When in 1980, Mom would have been 46 years old, and a beautiful middle-aged woman. Just absolutely, you see pictures of her before the fire, and you would agree. And she was burned over 55% of her body from her head down to her torso. So her face, her arms, her hands were third-degree burns. And the way then that they calculated your possibility or your probability of surviving is they would take your age and add the percentage of third-degree burns to that. And if it was less than 100, then you had a chance at winning. Well, 46 plus 55 was over 100. So she was not expected to survive the weekend. Yet she survived and wrote this book. And it's just an incredible story. And the last several months of working on this project to release a second edition has just been, it's been a labor of love, but it's just been so amazing to see some of the things that have happened even thus far. And the book just came out September 4th. So
yeah, it's really, really inspiring. And, this is called Courageous Love. And so we get the privilege of talking about it for the first time. This is the first time you've told the story publicly like this. And so I just think it's so fitting, having those types of tragedies happen in our life, similar to 9/11, which we just, had the anniversary of. It's one of those things where, exactly where you were.
Yes.
When you got the call. Where were you?
I was working for what was then Indiana National Bank. So I was sitting in my cube, and I got a call from my father, and he couldn't speak. So a friend of his, a coworker of his, picked up the phone to tell me what was going on. At the time, I was the only one. So my mom and dad had 4 kids. So there's 4 siblings. And I was the only one in Indianapolis. So I obviously dropped everything and drove over to the burn unit at Wishart Hospital. Today it's Eskenazi, to meet my dad over there. So yeah, and just even talking about it, I can see the cube that I was sitting in, the floor of the department where I worked, and rushing by my coworkers as I was leaving without hardly really telling them what was going on, because I didn't know what was going on. Right. All I knew at that time is Mom had been in an accident.
Yeah. And just like your mom in this writing, she literally describes it to where you feel like you are sitting in the room with her. Yes. Her descriptors. You clearly are a writer by your mother also. You got that talent from her. But I was listening or I was reading and just thinking, like, I feel like I'm sitting in the chair in the room with her.
Yeah. Sometimes maybe just too much detail as she talks about some of the things that happened to her body, and then some of the things that were done to her body to help her survive. An incredible part of the book. We were just recording this section for the audiobook today, and it's a section about Mom wondering how these medical professionals can do this, can inflict the pain that they have to inflict on another human being. And so she talks with a lot of the nurses and shares some of their stories too in the book, which is just incredible.
Yeah, I actually pointed out she loved her stories about the nurses and the caretakers and the bond that grew between them. Yes. She says they each brought the gift of themselves to her, which obviously we talk a lot about gifts on this podcast. She calls them Wishart's angels.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes. So one of the things, and I'll back up in time just a little bit of what led me to do this. So because I write, my name is out there, and every once in a while, probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times a year, I'll hear from somebody that found something that I wrote, and they reach out and say, "Hey, are you related to Mary Ellen Tunn?" And of course, I tell them the story. That's my mom, and they always relate either one or both of my mom's books, how they touched their lives. Well, I heard from someone, gosh, it's probably been a year ago now, who shared with me that her mom was one of the angels of Wishart. was just this wonderful connection, right? And then another person reached out and wanted to know if the book was available in digital format. It's like, well, no, 40 years ago when it was published, that didn't exist. And so that was the spark of the idea. And a shout out to David C. Cook Publishing Company. I reached out to them to identify what rights could be given to my mom's estate, and they graciously released all the rights to the book to her estate, to me, so that we could do this project. And we started with the ebook, and like I said, that's already out. This process of doing the audio book, Amber, has been another amazing story. I reached out to a friend of mine, Amy Brown. Amy is the CEO of Authentics here in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
I've known Amy. She'd kill me, but I've probably known Amy since she was 14, maybe. So she knew my mom through church. We all went to First Baptist Church here in town, and her mom and dad, John and Carol Brown, just amazing people, and they were friends with my mom and dad. And as I was thinking about who to get to do the audio, first of all, I wanted a female voice. It wouldn't make sense for me to do that.
Right.
And second, I really felt strongly that I wanted it to be somebody that knew mom. Mm-hmm. And so I reached out to Amy, and just out of the blue. In fact, I think that was the title of the email I sent her, an out of the blue question. And I posed this to her, and her email back was kind of funny, because she said, my first reaction was why me? But not in a bad way of, oh God, why me? It was why me? So I explained, she's about the same age my mom would have been, close to that in the fire. She knew mom. She has, if I say she's got this empathetic soul that my mom had, and it was just like, this would be so perfect. So I explained all that to her, and she agreed that we would do a pilot. We'd do a reading and just see how it went. And that first time we went down to the studio, we're recording it at 416 Wabash. It's a recording studio in downtown. Mm-hmm. We're sitting there with Mitch Lohman, the recording engineer, and I don't think we'd gotten 5 minutes in, and I'm crying and Amy's crying and we're hugging, and Mitch is looking at us like, what on earth have I gotten myself into here? I think he shed a tear or two. He'd never admit it, but I think he did too. But we got done with that, and I looked at Amy as we were kind of wrapping up, and I just said, okay, I want you to go think about this and decide if this is something that you want to do. And she just looked at me and said, I don't need to think about it. I'm doing this. And so we're continuing. I think we finished up chapter 6 today. So we've got quite a bit of a ways to go yet, but talk about being put in the room. The way this recording studio is set up, I sit outside the sound booth behind the recording engineer. I can't see Amy as she's reading. The recording engineer has a window view into the sound booth where he can see Amy, and they can kind of signal back and forth. So I'm just hearing the voice. And oh my gosh, Amber, it is my mother telling the story. Mm-hmm. I'll tell a funny story on Amy today. Part of the story, my mom, to get through some of the pain, starts singing songs. Mm-hmm. And the first song that she chose to sing was Doe, a deer, a female deer.
Yep.
Well, Amy stops before she reads that part. She says, do you want me to sing it? And so she actually sung it, and it was awesome. It was just awesome. And even the inflection, because at one point, Mom turns that into a scream,
Yeah.
and Amy follows suit as she's doing that. And this is going to be one of the most powerful experiences that people have when they listen to this audiobook. But you should also get the ebook.
Oh yes, I can't wait. Does she sing Amazing Grace too?
She does not. No. We had to draw the line somewhere.
I know.
Her brother, Jason Brown, is a singer songwriter here in town, and so she was like, "Oh man, I can't wait for Jason to hear this."
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the things that even was interesting that you and I this conversation even came up as we circle back around to the Wishard Angels is
Yes.
that my sister, and so she's 38, so 36 years ago, she was in the Wishard burn unit because she had second degree burns from a hot cup of tea that the cat had knocked down off of the table.
Yeah.
And so there's so much good stuff inside of your mom's story, but I want to get to that piece where she turns this tragedy and this traumatic situation into what's next for her life. And before we go there, I wanted to read this because you said to me over coffee that your mom died that night of the fire, but her physical body had lived even though badly burned.
Yeah.
You said her sense of self was destroyed overnight. At one point, your dad was even frightened to see the Mary Ellen he knew previously disappear.
Yeah.
Your mom talks about how her body had decided to reach for life, even though she had not made the choice.
Yeah.
When did she decide to make the choice to live again?
Honestly, I'd say it was, she talks about that later on in the book about making that choice, but I don't know that it was a Hallmark movie moment, right? It was, it built over time. She talks about at one point, knowing she was going to survive. And that was kind of the first piece is just even knowing that.
When she was sitting in the wheelchair, when she went and moved into the wheelchair.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, later, so she went home March, April of 1980. And so that summer and on into the next year was incredibly difficult for her. I think, as I mentioned, she was a beautiful, beautiful woman and was completely disfigured to the point that people would kind of just pull back from her. And she talks about looking in the mirror and seeing a monster looking back at her, and on more than one occasion to commit suicide. She tells this story in the book about deciding that she was going to do that. My dad had gone out for the evening to a meeting, and she was going to go in the garage and turn on the car and just be done. And she goes through this long story about trying to get the keys to the car because they were up on a hook higher than her arms wouldn't let her reach because of the burns and the contraction of the skin. And so she gets a chair or a stool and she gets the keys and they fall down on the floor and she has to plop down on the couch and let her arm fall and pick up the keys. And then she goes out in the garage and she couldn't open the car door. And that was the only thing that stopped her, was that her hands were so burnt and so useless to her, she could not open the car door. And, little tiny things started to break through to the Mary Ellen that we all knew or all hoped was in there, right? It was It was one of the grandsons coming over and putting his head on her lap. It was a dog she bought that she and my dad got, and she would walk that dog around the backyard for exercise. And Little Miss Muffet was the name of the dog, Muffy. You know, that dog, but it was hymns, you know, that she would sing and read. It was a particular book, and I'm drawing a blank now on the name of the book that kind of sparked some of this. But she came to the realization at some point that no matter how angry she got at God, no matter how many times she yelled and screamed at God, God didn't back away. God was there to, as she describes it, God was feeling hurt too.
Yeah.
You know, by what she was having to go through. And you talk about your sister, Amber, and I think that was, you know, one of the connections that you and I made. Here's this woman that was, you know, our family has a morbid sense of humor. And so when humor finally broke through months and months and months after the fire, she would call herself the crispy critter. So just go with that. You know, but here's this woman that has gone through that, her entire sense of being. And, you know, she talks about being bombarded by television and magazine of beauty, right? A woman is only as you know, as much as her beauty is, right?
Especially back then.
Especially in the 80s. And, you know, that's what she was bombarded with all the time. And here she was, just this crispy critter. But she used this experience, and she ended up, by the time she's writing the book 2 years later, she's actually working in the Wishart Burn unit. And she's the doctor-patient liaison. Who better to help patients navigate this than someone who has been through it? So we haven't quite been able to figure out between you and I whether she was there when your sister was there, because I don't know exactly. I can't remember exactly when she stopped doing that work. But I know it was for several years during the 80s that she was there. So chances are the paths of your family and my family crossed back then.
I bet it did. I truly believe it probably did. I think she was there in 85, 84, 85, which would have been 3 or 4 years, you know, after.
Yeah.
So right around that time. And I can remember because I was young, you know, I was, so I would have been 6. I can remember they raved about the staff at Wishart and how much they just took care of this sweet little baby, and she was wrapped up. I remember, which is funny how we talked about how you remember things. My sister was in a yellow zip up onesie, like I can remember, and she had been burned on part of her head and her hair, and that's just a smidgen, right, of the trauma that. But it left some physical marks on my sister, and left some mental and emotional ones too. And so I understand a portion of that, of what your family went through.
Yeah.
So what did coming out of this and your mom finding herself again, who was she post?
Well, so part of the forward to the second edition is the eulogy I gave for my mom when she passed away in 2013.
Beautiful.
And there's a great poem by, I think her name was Linda Ellis. I was going to look that up before we jumped on here. Yes, Linda Ellis wrote this poem called Dashes. And it was a story of a man who was giving a eulogy for a friend and talked about he was born on this date and he died on this date. But the most important part was the dash in between. Right. And so my mom had 2 dashes, because the mom that I grew up with, that raised us as kids, died on January 4th, 1980. the woman that came out of that was changed. She was different. Loved I love them both dearly, absolutely dearly, but she was different. She had a different perspective on self. By the time she got through this, it was no more about the outer beauty, but the inner beauty. I would say her faith and her relationship with God dramatically changed through that. I kind of joked tongue in cheek in the eulogy that before the fire, she was kind of Billy Graham, and after the fire, she was John Shelby Spong, who is an Episcopalian writer that's kind of test the limits sometimes. And interesting side note, Amber, I went to get ready for this evening. I wanted to look up John Spong and some of his books, and found out that he died last Sunday on September 12th. He was 90 years old.
No.
Prolific author of some great works that my mom discovered through this time, and it helped forge her faith as she came through that fire. And just a different relationship. She was, as a minister's wife in the 60s and the 70s, she might be described as maybe just a touch uptight.
No,
maybe just a skosh. And after the fire, she was a little bit more open, a little bit more free, a little bit, not laissez-faire, but close.
right.
Things that were important before the fire weren't all that important after the fire. There was a life's lesson in there that sometimes you don't have to sweat the small stuff.
That's right. Speaking of your father, how did he handle the change in who she was? Being a, he's a minister.
Yes.
So her different way of viewing God, but did his evolve alongside of hers, or how did that dynamic work?
I would say that yes, his evolved alongside hers. I don't know that it evolved as far as hers did. So my dad was an American Baptist minister, and in the now Baptist or Baptist, but in the Baptist faith, the American Baptists are probably a little bit further left than most of the other Baptist denominations. I think that's fair to say. So they were already kind of there. My dad did a lot with his churches during the civil rights times of the 60s and 70s and on into the 80s. He was a big proponent of women in ministry. He helped raise up women in ministry. And later, when my mom found her voice through the fire, they did a lot of that together, raising up women in ministry, diversity and inclusion. Before
it was a thing,
became a thing.
Yeah,
they were pushing for that. And I was reminded the other day at lunch. I had lunch with one of my dad's best friends. My dad passed away in 2019, and we were talking about a time in church service in Evansville. It was an urban church. It was the 70s, and during my high school days, my high school was let out of school more times for race riots than for snow. So it was a very tense time. And there was an African-American woman who was in our choir. I think she might have been the only African-American in the church, potentially. But he had her sing Go Tell It on the Mountain at a Christmas Eve candlelight vigil during the middle of this of these race riots, and you saw a congregation of 200 people in tears by the time she got done. And so anyway, I'd say his relationship with God also evolved. His relationship with my mom definitely evolved. They were always deeply in love, but any marriage that lasts 50 or 60 years has its problems.
Of course.
And they did have their problems. And, even after the fire, mom talks about the struggle to get back to intimacy, right? You're
Yeah.
completely disfigured. And how do you get back there? And somehow they found their way back to that. And it's an amazing story of faith. It's an amazing story of love. And it's just, it's been a wonderful time to try to bring this story back to life. And I'm going to share another, a dear friend of mine, Melva Gray. Melva, if you're listening, how you doing? She would call it divine coincidences. So there's been a couple of divine coincidences in this whole process of bringing mom's book back to life. The first one was Amy Brown. I mentioned her. She's doing the audio book. She shared with me after the first recording session that she always has a word for the year and a scripture. And her word for the year was fire. And the scripture was, the flame shall not consume you. And even before I reached out. So that was divine coincidence number one. Divine coincidence number two happened just a couple of weeks ago. My wife and my son Brad and I traveled to Green Lake, Wisconsin to spread my dad's ashes where we had spread mom. Mom actually talks about Green Lake in the book. So you'll get a picture of Green Lake and what it meant to our family. But that's where we sprinkled mom back in 2014. So now it was time to sprinkle dad. So at the same time, Jennifer Vogel is designing the cover for the new revised, the second edition. And she sends me some mock-ups of the cover while we're driving up. So I couldn't really look at them. Sunday, we go out near the lake and we start spreading dad's ashes, and some of the ashes fell into the water. And as the water and the current spread the ashes, it looked like wisps of smoke on the surface of the water. I thought it was really, really cool. So I took a picture of it. Monday morning, I'm sitting looking at the images that Jennifer had designed, and you will see on the cover that there's wisps of fire and smoke. You can take the photograph that I took of that lake and lay it over that cover, and it's identical. It lays perfectly on top of that. And it just gave me chills to think about that. So this project is kind of meant to be,
Oh yeah. I mean, I have goosebumps from head to toe with you sharing that story. And I think it is divine, right? God figured out, because God always makes everything good. He figures out a way, to really make things good again. And in this, you are creating this legacy for her and your family, and really helping people build courage and learn to love themselves no matter what they look like.
Yeah. Mom talks a lot about that in the book, as you know, Amber, and she talks about prayer and, kind of what is prayer, the power of prayer. And, when the fire first happened, it was, I didn't know what to pray for, right? Do I pray for her to live, or do I pray for her to die? You don't know. And so many people, that was another thing that helped her get through this, is people from all over the country that she and my dad didn't even know were sending cards and letters. And
Coming to the hospital.
Yeah, right to the hospital. Coming to the hospital.
Yeah.
She tells the story of
David
Jans. David Jans was a burn victim that was here in Indianapolis and heard about the fire like on the radio when it happened. And within an hour was at the hospital asking the family if there was anything that he could do. He himself had been pretty badly burned in an asphalt accident. And it's like, oh my gosh, just the outpouring of people. And I think what Mom finally decided is it didn't really matter what people prayed for. What mattered is that they prayed.
That's right.
Right. That was her strength. That's where she was getting strength from, was knowing that these people all over the country had her in their hearts, in their minds, and in their prayers. And she was able to draw tremendous strength from that.
Yeah. So I want to turn it around on you a little bit. I want to hear a little bit about your perspective in the few minutes that we have left. She said that you wrote a poem.
Yes.
That gave an amazing explanation of how everyone was feeling, and an explanation of the faithfulness and gratefulness. You know, that you still got to have your mom, regardless of what was going to happen next, right?
Yes,
Tell us how that came to be.
Well, that was still in my rock star phase, when all I ever wanted to be was a rock star, and you know that story, Amber. I probably shared it way too many times. You know, I wrote poetry. I wrote song lyrics. That's how I expressed my thoughts and my feelings. And so I forget when in the sequence I actually wrote the poem, the song, whatever you want to call it, but it was called The Window. So it was about that window that she was able to escape from, because that was the only route out. And you know, the song or the poem starts about the window into pain, the window into agony, all those things that as she went through that window that she was entering into. But it wraps up with, it was a window into life. And see, there you go. I promised I wouldn't do this. But it was my way, I guess, of reaching out to my mom and saying that you're still here. We still have you. And we're not ready to let you go. Your kids need you. Your grandkids need you. You know, your great grandkids that are, you know, a generation to come need you. And, you know, that's kind of where that was born out of.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's incredible. I can't wait for you all to read it. Jeff is just like his mama. He's a super great writer. So I can't wait for you all to read it. Jeff, how has this happening to your mom changed you?
I am probably a completely different person than I would have been otherwise. In a lot of ways. And it's made me stronger. It's given me this incredible role model. I mean, holy cow, I grew up with this role model of my dad, and you know, I tongue in cheek, the great Reverend Dr. Eugene Tunn, right? Or Dr. Reverend. I can never remember which order
which
those
comes
go
first.
Right. Dr. Reverend, I think is, but anyway, here's that. And I can remember in high school, in the youth group at church, the leaders of the youth group pulling me aside one night and telling me what big shoes I have to fill. And it's like, oh, no pressure there. Right.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. But then my mom, to go through this was a role model of strength. It was a role model of courage. Courage when you don't even know that you have courage. Courage that you're so angry, you're so broken that courage might be, raising your hand an inch off the bed. That might be the extent of your courage. But to watch that, and I'd also say that my mom and I were pretty close. I think it's safe to say my mom and I were closer at that time than my dad and I. My dad and I got very close later on in his life. But we both attended accounting class together at University of Indianapolis.
My alma mater.
Back in the day. And, we'd sit in the car before class and help each other study or whatever. And, here's this 22-year-old kid. I'm helping my mom because she had test anxiety. She would just freak out over tests. But not only did we do that, but these drives down to the campus from the north side where we lived and they lived, my mom and I would talk. We'd talk about life. We'd talk about faith. We'd talk about everything. And while the fire interrupted that, we were able to get back to that. Later on. And as she was exploring her faith, I was exploring mine. I read a lot of Spong's books and they made a lot of sense to me. I would say on the continuum, and I know if you're listening on the podcast, you can't see my motions, but on the continuum, you have my dad, and maybe a little bit farther, we'll call it left, although that's got such political connotations. I don't mean it politically. Maybe my mom is a little bit further left, and then I'm a little bit further left from that. That's probably the best way to describe it. So
yeah. So I grew up Baptist also. So I know all about all of that. And I feel like I needed to know your mom and dad, be given my path of ministry, right? And having advocates for women in the pulpit, it's been a challenging road and one that I know that God wouldn't bring me through if he didn't put me here. So I know, I don't know what it looks like at the end, but I know that I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I'm thankful for people like your parents who were willing to put a stake in the ground for it, right? Because it blazed a path. Speaking of fire, blazed a path for someone like me.
Absolutely.
And I love it because you're doing this, I now know generations of your family. I have a little insight into your mom and dad and to you and your brothers and your sister and your son, and now I know Brad too. And your grandson. So it just, Jeff, you're leaving this. It's not just about your mom's legacy. It's about your family's legacy. And that's really what this podcast, it's a great way to wrap this up is, that's what this is about. Everybody has a story, and your story is meant to be shared because the gifts inside of that story will impact somebody's life. I am so thankful that you were willing to be vulnerable with me tonight and to allow me to be the one, we talked about the fire thing with me too. And how fire has always been kind of surrounding me. And I had my moment with the Bible when I opened the book and I didn't even know my name was in the book. Yeah. And of course it shows up like the fire, the color of amber.
Yes.
Right. So I'm so thankful for you, Jeff. I'm so thankful that you were willing to step out and do a second rendition of your mom's book. So before we hop off, where can they find it?
Amazon.
Yep.
That's it's the Kindle version. Now, for those of you who don't have a Kindle, I'll remind you, you can download an app on your iPhone, your iPad, your desktop, your Android phone. You don't have to have a device. You can still read the book. And it's a huge investment of $1.99.
And if you want to connect with Jeff, because he's just a really good human, he is one of my favorites out there. I'm so glad that we're friends. You can reach him at jeffreystunn.com. and you can book him to speak. You can get access to his other 2 books and just connect with Jeff because he's amazing. So thank you, Jeff. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. And I can't wait to continue to see what you do with this book. So thank you.
Amber, thank you so much for having me on the show. And maybe when the audio book comes out, we'll do a little audio clip on your show.
I would love it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right.